All right, we are recording, and this will be posted on the Libertyville-Mundelein Historical Society's YouTube channel sometime later this week when I get a chance to get it up there. Other housekeeping, if you have a question, please put it into the chat. Make sure that you chat it to everyone. I do have someone from the Historical Society watching the chat, but they are not set up as a host or a panelist on this Zoom call, so they'll have to see it. You must send it to everyone for them to see it. If it's really an important question, I'll see if I can see it in the middle. I'm probably not going to be paying attention to the chat myself while we're going on, so I'll address questions generally at the end. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Tonight is Who Was Ansel B. Cook? This is also the last in our programs supporting the 100th anniversary of the library. And since we are the Cook Memorial Public Library, it just made sense to sort of wrap up the year with a little bit of information about who Ansel B. Cook is. All right. So Ansel was born on August 18th, 1893 in Haddam, Connecticut. He's the son of Willard C. Cook and Abigail Brainerd Cook. Willard's father, Nathaniel Cook, was a sergeant in the Revolutionary War. Willard was in the quarry business with his father-in-law, Captain Ansel Brainerd, who had served in the War of 1812. Their quarry provided stone for Fort Hamilton, New York. When that was being built, Robert E. Lee was the government engineer in charge of construction. His paternal side goes back to the Mayflower, and on the maternal side, back to the first governor of Connecticut. And actually today, the quarry is now the Brainerd Quarry Preserve under the Middlesex Land Trust in Connecticut. Ansel attended Brainerd Academy, which was established by John and Nehemiah Brainerd, obviously part of the extended Brainerd family in the area. I'm not sure of the exact relationship. But in the portrait biographical album of Lake County, it was written, it was his intention to pursue a collegiate course, but failing health frustrated this plan, and he began learning the stonecutter's trade. This disappointment proved one of the blessings of his life, for the work which he took up when he found he could not continue his studies has made him not only well-to-do, but a prominent man as well. So in a profile of Willard Cook in Chicago, Its History and Its Builders, it says that Willard heard of opportunities in Illinois from friends who had already moved there. Now, those may have been George Brainerd, who was a cousin of Abigail, who had moved out in 1845, or it might have been also Samuel Hurlburt Swan and his 4 sons, who had moved out from Haddam, Connecticut, also in 1845. And you can see in this 1861 township map of Fremont Township, you can see Willard Cook's property on the red side, in the red circle, and then the Swans and the Brainards in the yellow circles. So Willard was impressed enough that he decided to buy some land, and he purchased 80 acres. You can see in section 13 of Fremont Township. According to the Illinois Public Domain Land Tract Sales Database, the transactions were completed in September 1846. This is approximately at the current day corner of Midlothian Road and Winchester Road. Now, most biographical sketches of Ansel say he came here in May of 1845, but the before mentioned profile of Willard, property records, and church records suggest 1846. The family's journey west is described in Willard's profile. The family left Connecticut on June 3rd, 1846. It was Willard and his wife Abigail with their children Ansel Brainerd, age 23, Abigail Florilla, age 19, Charles Willard, age 14, and Ellen, age 6. It was a 17-day trip. They traveled down the Connecticut River to New York, and then by canal packet boat along the Hudson River. They were towed up the Hudson to Troy, New York, and then drawn by mules on the Erie Canal to Buffalo. Then on the steamer Missouri, they headed for Little Fort, now Waukegan, via the Great Lakes. It was a rough trip, and several times the ship was in danger of foundering, and actually the Missouri did founder on the second voyage after the Cooks. They arrived in Little Fort on June 20th, 1846. So in September of 1846, Sabbath day, the following named persons were admitted as members of this church by letter of recommendation from the First Congregational Church at Haddam, Connecticut. This is now the Ivanhoe Congregational Church, but you can see that Willard, Abigail, and Ansel were accepted into that congregation in September of 1846. Willard and his family farmed for about 8 years. Ansel taught at Central School in Waukegan for some time, beginning in 1849. And he also taught about 3 months at the Libertyville School, which at that time was about 16 feet south of the picnic basket and about 10 feet from Milwaukee Avenue. Ansel married Helen Maria Foster on December 2nd, 1849. She was born March 3rd, 1828 in Orange County, Vermont, and was the daughter of Dr. Jesse H. Foster. Now, we don't know much more about Helen, but it is worth talking a little bit about her father. Dr. Foster's family moved to Libertyville about 1837. With him was his wife, Mary Andrews Foster, his daughter Helen, and their younger daughter Lizzie. He ran a hotel for a time and was the town's first practicing physician. In August 1851, the editor of the Waukegan Gazette wrote a column about his travels around Lake County. In the part about his visit to Libertyville, he mentioned Dr. Foster was part of the firm of Foster and Mason, which owned a shrub nursery of 1.5 million plants. I don't know if that's a typo or not. Dr. Foster's sweet potatoes, apple trees, and gooseberry bushes looked particularly well. So Dr. Foster was born in Hollis, New Hampshire in 1801 and graduated from the University of Vermont as a physician in 1825. When he moved in 1837 to Libertyville with his wife and 2 daughters, he purchased lots 2, 24, and 25 in section 16, which is approximately the current Cook Park back to Butler Lake and around 20 acres. He served as postmaster from 1841 to 1843. He ran an apothecary shop, sorry, tripping over my tongue tonight. And in 1844, with John Hutchinson, he donated land to build the Methodist Church, which was about where the Methodist Church is today. Unfortunately, in 1868, his wife Mary died in Libertyville. In the June 1870 census, we see Dr. Foster living with his son-in-law, Ansel B. Cook. And in July 1870, he sold his land holdings to Ansel, married in December of 1870 to a woman from Lynn, Massachusetts, and moved back east. He died in 1894 in Hollis, New Hampshire at the age of 93. All right, now back to Ansel. Biographical sketches mention that Ansel and Helen had 2 children that died as infants. We know that Ida Elizabeth Cook was born to Ansel and Helen Cook on December 20th, 1850, and died September 15th, 1851. Her name is on a monument in Graceland Cemetery in Chicago, but she is actually buried at Lakeside. No further information is known about the other infant, and there is no mention of a second child in the probate records. In 1853, Willard and Ansel Cook secured the contract for stone sidewalks around the new Chicago Courthouse Square on the block bounded by LaSalle, Washington, Clark, and Randolph Streets. This is the same courthouse where Abraham Lincoln laid in state during his funeral procession in May 1865. Based on this success, the family moved to Chicago. Here they formed W and A.B. Cook, and in this business combination until about 1872. The stone yard was at the site of what is today the Willis Tower. Market Street was changed to Wacker Drive, and Quincy Street was closed to build the tower. City directories show later business locations at 87 Washington and 161 LaSalle. And according to the past and present of Lake County, which was published in 1877, By the time of the Great Fire of Chicago, Cook had laid nearly all of the flagstone walk in the city. We know that in 1856, A.B. Cook had a house built on Rucker Street. You can see in this little blurb from the Chicago Tribune that a 2-story brick dwelling house in Rucker Street for A.B. Cook at a cost of $6,000, which is about $194,000 in today's money. It was designed by Van Olsen and Bauman, who were architects, and also is considered Chicago's first architect and designed the courthouse building we saw a few slides back. In the 1862 and 64 city directories, Ansel is living at 43 Rucker, which I think is now Racine Avenue, and I'll show you a map in just a moment. At that point, Willard is living at 385 Adams, and later Ansel would live at 380 Adams, which is actually further west than you might think. In 1909, Chicago streets were renumbered. So today that would be about 1,221 West Adams, which is quite a bit west of the Chicago River and just east of Ashland Avenue, near today's Whitney Young Magnet School. So there's that map I mentioned. So as far as I can tell, the only place I can find Rucker on the map is up here in the blue square. I'm not positive if Racine kind of runs this direction now. And then Adams running here, I'm not positive exactly where along here their house was, but this to give you just a sense of where the houses were, definitely west of the river. Helen and Ansel adopted a daughter who they also named Ida, Ida F. Cook. We don't know the exact date of her adoption. We do know that she graduated with first honors from Lake Geneva Seminary, a boarding school for girls, in 1874. In 1862, Ansel entered politics. He was nominated by the Builders and Traders Association of Chicago as the Republican candidate for the state legislature. According to Portrait and Biographical Album of Lake County, Cook was first a Whig, then a Free Soiler, and then joined the Republican Party when it was organized in 1856. He ran in District 59, which included 7 wards on the west side of Chicago, as well as 9 country towns, which at that time included such towns as Cicero, which we may not think of as a country town today. He was elected in 1862 and began his 2-year term in 1863. He was reelected for a term that began in 1865. I have not done a full review of Ansel Cook's political activities during his time as a state representative, but I do have some brief information on a few issues in which he played a part. According to Cook's entry in the Portrait and Biographical Album of Lake County, Cook investigated a conflict of interest between the state commissioner, Speaker of the House, a state senator, and chairman of the Penitentiary Committee regarding state contracts. Each of the parties had not previously revealed a quarter interest in contracts that had been approved by the state legislature. After investigation, the contracts were retracted. And apparently this meant quite a bit to Cook, as in the Portrait and Biographical Album of Lake County, for which people had to pay to be part of. It says, our subject has received very complimentary mention for honest endeavors to prevent glaring fraud upon the people of the state, and his labors certainly merit the praise he has received. Cook was a member of the Illinois State House of Representatives when the Corwin Amendment was circulated to the states for approval. In 1861, the U.S. Congress passed the Corwin Amendment, which said, no amendment shall be made to the Constitution which will authorize or give to Congress the power to abolish or interfere with any state with the domestic institutions thereof, including that of persons held to labor or service by the laws of the said state. So basically the Corwin Amendment was prohibiting the federal government from ever passing another amendment to abolish slavery. If this amendment was approved by the required 3/4 of the states, the Corwin Amendment would have been the 13th Amendment. Illinois was one of 5 states that ratified the Corwin Amendment. We can see at the bottom in the red square that Cook voted against it. Cook was also involved in early discussions about the establishment of a state mechanical and agricultural university, which eventually opened in 1868 as the Illinois Industrial University and was later renamed the University of Illinois in 1885. In 1866, Ansel moved back to Libertyville. According to Libertyville Illustrated, which was published in 1897, this was due to poor health. The profile and portrait and biographical album mentions the move back, but also doesn't give a reason. And I'm wondering if there maybe wasn't a secondary reason. While preparing for this presentation, I came across a series of articles in the Chicago Tribune, which indicate Ansel was accused of some not quite honorable dealings with his votes regarding some railroad privileges. He soundly denied any impropriety. At this time, Ansel was living in Chicago, representing Cook County in the state legislature. And I'm just wondering if he might have felt like he needed to get out of the city for a bit. So at this point, this is complete conjecture, since I'm just thinking the timing is curious. I didn't have time to give the issue my full attention, but I plan on taking a closer look at the story in the future. In either case, the accusations were either disproved or didn't seem to bother the people of Libertyville. In 1867, they elected him township supervisor, and then in 1868, he was elected back to the state legislature, this time from Lake County, District 53. In 1868, he probably had something to do with the building of the Union Church, which is seen here. It was designed by William W. Boynton, who was also a colleague of Cook in the state legislature. And we know that Cook was also superintendent of the Sunday school at about the same time after the church was built. Even though he was living in Libertyville, he continued his business in Chicago. In 1869, he got the masonry contract for the historic Chicago Water Tower, which was also designed by William W. Boynton. Now, I'm not positive where the Cooks were living in Libertyville in 1866, but an October 1868 letter to the editor of the Waukegan Weekly Gazette indicates that Ansel had purchased Dr. Foster's house, and it said that he now occupies it and intends to go to housekeeping immediately after election. That would be the state representative election from Lake County. The letter continued that Dr. Foster's wife, Mary, had passed that year, and Dr. Foster had moved to Chicago to live with his younger daughter, Lizzie. Now that says 1868. Lake County deed records indicate a formal transfer of the property to Ansel in July of 1870. What we're looking at here is an 1873 bird's eye view lithograph that is in the Libertyville-Mundelein Historical Society collection. The Foster Cook property is there in the red section. You can see the Union Church, which we just saw a picture of, straight across the street. It's our belief that this house that you see here is the Foster home and not the Ansel B. Cook home that you see today. This is probably the Dr. Foster's house. It was moved to Cook Avenue, a little west of today's Village Hall, and used as a caretaker's house when the new Cook House was built. And in an essay written in the 1950s by Historical Society member C.E. Carroll, he says this was the home of a Mrs. L.H. Morris. After the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, Ansel returned to the city to help rebuild. He built several large business blocks in partnership with William Price, another Chicago businessman with Libertyville attachments. The two were in business together from 1871 to 1877. The Bryant Building, built in 1874 and now known as the Delaware Building, is still standing. It's at the northeast corner of Dearborn and Randolph and is on the National Register of Historic Places. From 1877 to 1879, Ansel was alderman of the 11th Ward of Chicago, and he also served as president of the council. The 11th Ward is kind of in that blue, green, gray color there in the center of the screen. While on the council, he was a member of the Judiciary, Local Assessments, and the Public Buildings Committees, and then later the Wharfing Privileges, Harbor and Bridges, and Public Buildings Committees. He was chairman of the building committee for City Hall when they were discussing building a new building, and was involved in a disagreement over the selection of the stone. Now, as a Mason, we're sure he had an opinion. The land for the City Hall was owned by Cook County. An agreement had been made to build the City Hall and new county courthouse alike in appearance. Cook County selected Lamont stone for the buildings, but Ansel objected based on, quote, scientific examination and 30 years practical experience in stone cutting and building. He recommended a Bedford stone, which was similar in color, but there was intense opposition. In his speech before City Council, he predicted that in less than 10 years, the stone would begin to fall off. Less than 25 years, birds could build their nests in the holes caused by erosion, and 50 years, they would need to tear down the building. The building, which was completed in 1885, several years after Cook's tenure on the City Council, did have issues. The county courthouse, which used the Lamont stone, 6 years later, the spalls began to fall, and the next year, $150,000 was spent to cut down the cornices and to take other safety measures to protect falling stone from pedestrians, or pedestrians from falling stone. On the other hand, the City Hall, which was the same size, architectural design, and cost half as much, was fine. Other problems that beset this building from the start, and talk of replacing it started almost as soon as it opened. The colonnaded French Renaissance exterior was stylish enough, but the interior was problematic. Tall ceilings with small windows and dark, drafty corridors made it uncomfortable. Plus, the building had taken so long to complete that it quickly proved inadequate and crowded. Unfortunately, architect James J. Egan used an experimental mat and pile foundation system that would eventually fail. In 1905, the building's foundation sank 6 inches, which caused the gas pipe to rupture and caused an explosion that blew the roof off the building. The city and county saw their chance to rid themselves of the defective structure and finally construct a proper city hall and county building, which is the one that stands today. During this time, Cook's influence, status, and pocketbook grew. He began work on a fine new country house to reflect his stature in the business and political world. The work was completed in 1878. The architect is again thought to be William W. Boynton, who also did the Water Tower, the Union Church, and the Libertyville Town Hall, which we'll see in just a moment, which is today's American Legion Hall. In 1879, the Cook's daughter, Ida, married Dr. Albert Bliss Strong, who was a lecturer at Rush Medical College and chair of anatomy. The joy of a wedding was fairly quickly overshadowed by tragedy. In 1881, Helen Foster Cook was killed in a train accident as Ansel and Helen traveled from Chicago to their Libertyville home. This is from the Inner Ocean, January 21st, 1881. On January 19th, which was the night before last, Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul was delayed at Western Avenue until 9 p.m. and then also delayed at Thornton. The train was just leaving Oak Glen, which is about 17 miles north of Chicago, when the express train ran into the rear car and demolished it. Dense fog obscured the signal lights. 5 passengers were severely injured, including Mrs. Cook. Injuries were caused by escaping steam and scalded her face and arms, and she died at her home at 380 West Adams on January 20th. The Cooks had been intending for several days to come to their country home in Libertyville to stay for a week and visit friends and go sleighing. They weren't able to make the Tuesday evening or Wednesday morning train, and they arrived at the train station Wednesday evening to find the train delayed from 6:20 p.m. to 8:45 p.m. The locomotive attached to the 5 p.m. train from Milwaukee was run into by a Chicago and Northwestern freight train and caused a blockade. The couple took passage in the rear car. 2 men in the forward car were intoxicated and loud, so Mr. Cook and John S. Price of Libertyville had just stepped to the rear of the car and looked out the window. They saw the express train coming, but assumed it would slow down. Mr. Cook had just enough time to jump from the car when he realized the crash was imminent. The express train locomotive dashed into the passenger car, tearing it to fragments, and pushed it along approximately 48 feet until they stopped. The waste pipe of the locomotive burst and boiling hot water poured into the wreck. Mrs. Cook was drenched by the water and received severely burned hands, arms, face, and back. Mrs. Cook was brought to her Chicago home about 4 a.m. She was attended by her son-in-law, Dr. Albert Strong, and another physician. A few minutes before noon, quote, she sank, and calling on her husband to raise her up, she expired in his arms, end quote. I've not found any information that anyone else on the train died. A Mr. Singer had 2 of the 3 ribs broken. He was the son of the sewing machine manufacturer, and his father-in-law lived in Diamond Lake. Miss Bertha Seavey, whose parents lived in Libertyville, she was the principal of the school in Hyde Park, had a severe flesh wound, and a Miss Scully had burned hands. Others were just slightly hurt. But that wasn't the end of the tragedy. In March of 1881, just a few months later, their first grandchild, Albert Cook Strong, the first son of Ida and Albert Strong, passed away just short of his first birthday. Ida and Albert lost 2 other children as well. Their daughter, Helen Strong, died in 1890 at age 20 months, and their son, Edward Strong, passed away in 1895. Of 6 children, 3 had died. Family lore is that this was the final straw for Ida and Albert, who were not well suited to each other from the first place. Ida and Albert divorced in June of 1896. Ida moved to California in 1898 with their youngest son, Ralph, and the 2 older boys stayed in Chicago. Albert died in March of 1900 from exhaustion of mania, which is generally associated with what we call bipolar disorder today. He was in the Kankakee Insane Asylum, where he had been committed a short time before. For more information on Ida and Albert and the Strong family, you can see the recording about Walter Ansel Strong, who was one of their surviving sons and grew up to be editor of the Chicago Daily News, presented by his grandson, David Strong, on our YouTube channel. David gave a presentation on his family last spring. About a year later, Ansel married Annie Barrows of Meridian, New Hampshire. She had been born February 2nd, 1882. I'm sorry, they were married February 2nd, 1882. She was born in April 12th, 1840, to John and Lydia Barrows of New Hampshire. So for a long time, we had wondered how Ansel ended up marrying Annie Barrows. There's this woman who's out east, he lives here. How did they meet? Well, several years ago, some gentlemen researching Ansel's brother Charles, who had a large farm in Iowa, made the connection. So here's the flow chart they shared with us. So Charles Cook, who is Ansel's brother, his second wife was named Jenny Wade. Her mother was Sophronia Smith, who, was sisters of Lydia Smith, who's the mother of Annie Barrows and Emily Barrows, who we'll meet in just a moment. So there's a connection, family connection, somewhat distant. First cousins, Emily and Annie are first cousins of Jenny Wade, Charles Cook's second wife. So there'll be a quiz on that later. Ansel retired to Libertyville in the spring of 1889. Unfortunately, in 1891, Annie Barrows Cook died. The obituary said, "The summons of the messenger came when none expected it. She had been a graduate of a noted Eastern institution of learning, an extensive reader, was an honored member of several of Chicago's best literary societies, and a very talented amateur artist." Not to wait too long to be without a wife, Ansel then marries Emily Barrows, Annie's sister, in 1892. She had been born in 1843 in Massachusetts and graduated from Kimball Union Academy in Meridian, New Hampshire. He may have been retired, but Ansel didn't stay out of politics. In 1894, he was chairman of the building committee for Libertyville Township when they built their new town hall, which is today's American Legion. Again, designed by William Boynton and built by W.D. Price, who was the son of William Price, who was mentioned earlier as being a partner of Ansel in the early days in Chicago. That same year, there was an editorial in the newspaper. And those of you who attended our library history presentation will have already seen this before. So there was a move to get a library. And there was this little editorial, and it says, "By donating around $1,000 to the Cook Question Library, let the first liberal donator have the name." So whether it was a coincidence or not, Cook made out a will December 15th, 1894, that provided for an A.B. Cook Memorial Hall with a free library therewith. So May 27th, 1898, the newspaper reported that Cook was confined to bed, but is rapidly improving. This is a screenshot of a doctor's bill from probate records from that time period. And we can see there are multiple visits per day from Dr. Charles Galloway, and Ansel was making trips to Chicago to see a Dr. Stillman. In the June 10th newspaper, it said he was seriously sick for several days and is no better. Mr. Cook is suffering with chronic kidney trouble, and last week a Chicago physician was called in consultation. Little encouragement is given to his ultimate recovery. And he died that same day, and he's buried in Graceland Cemetery in Chicago. And you can see in this obituary, this is the only place we've ever seen a reference to his home called Mapleside. We don't have anything else in the Historical Society collection that refers to the house in that way. But if you ever hear Mapleside mentioned, that is the Ansel B. Cook home. Well, Ansel's will provided that his home and grounds be sold to provide the building for a memorial hall. According to Mabel McGuffin in a 1946 letter, there was a large mortgage on the property, which Emily Cook paid off with her own money. Oop, let me go back. So Mr. Cook may not have had as much money at the end as he had earlier. Local merchant J.B. Morse had signed Cook's will. He said, "I was just a young fellow working in the Colby General Store here in town when it happened. Mr. Cook used to come in and sit around the big stove we had in the middle of the room and swap tales and talk politics. This particular day, Mr. Cook came in, asked some of his friends to sign his will. They all did, but he still needed another signature, so he asked me to sign it, and I did. Later, Mr. Morse was Lake County clerk, and he saw the will attested. He did not remember the extent of the estate, but remembers it was a lot less than what most people thought he was worth." In 1911 and 13, Mabel's sister was in library school at the University of Illinois and conducted a survey of library needs in Libertyville. As the families were close, Mabel's sister had seen the interior of the Cook home often and drew up a sketch of the house as a library. Through Emily's sister, Tamsin Monroe, Mrs. McGuffin encouraged Emily to make sure her husband's wishes would become a reality by leaving the house to the village as a library and the surrounding property as a public park. Emily Cook died on December 11, 1919, and in August of 1920, the deed to the Cook house and property was turned over to the village. Since no funds were provided to convert the house to a library, money had to be raised in order to stucco the building, build the colonial pillared porch, and make other necessary improvements. Libertyville really got behind the project. Fundraising events and donations brought in money from all sides, and the Cook Memorial Library opened its doors to the public on October 22nd, 1921. So it's rare to find actual information about the personality of a person. We don't have any letters of Ansel B. Cook's or his family. We don't have diaries. We don't have anything like that that gives us too much insight into his personality, but we do have a couple of quotes here that help a little bit. This one says, "The simplicity, honesty, integrity, and thrift of his New England forefathers were reflected in his every action. His fearlessness as a leader in every struggle for the right as he saw the right, his abiding faith in the principles and constitutional freedom that had made America great. In the quiet of his beautiful home, he became a most hospitable host." So in the 1950s, a high school student in Libertyville named Sid Gisler wrote "The Last Happy Days of Ansel Brainerd Cook" as a term paper. And as part of that project, he interviewed a few what he called old timers. So here's a couple of quotes from that. "That's Mr. Cook's house. Back in the 1890s, that was just about the classiest creation in these parts," said Ralph Buckley, who was 91 at the time. "We all looked up to him as a big businessman. He had a lot of influence and was always interested in public affairs," said J.B. Morse, who was 81 at the time. And Buckley also said he was a great storyteller and had lots of friends. "I never heard anyone say anything against him." Well, Ralph Buckley may not have heard anyone say anything against Mr. Cook, but as we saw from the railroad episode that I'm investigating, he might not have been beyond reproach, or at least the ire of his enemies. And one other thing we have to look at that shows a little bit about his personality is from his probate records and bills that were due at the time of his death. So from these particular receipts, we can see that he really liked pot roast, and he had it several times. He also liked oysters and had many of them. And he also liked cigars. So that's an introduction to the life of Ansel B. Cook. We covered his early days coming to Illinois from New England, getting into the masonry business in Chicago, entering politics, and some of his contributions to Libertyville. There's probably much, much more that we can learn about him, especially now that we have better access to the newspapers from Chicago, from Libertyville, and also some of the Chicago proceedings, the state legislative proceedings. There's a whole project unto itself to go back and look at politics that he might have been involved in, and potentially business deals as well. So at this point, I'm going to come back on the screen and take a look at the chat and see if I can answer any questions. Okay. I just have one comment. I'm not sure what it was referring to. Perhaps I had a, the quote, the chat says an old abbreviation from Roman numerals, I think M equals 1,000. I'm not sure what that's referring to. Maybe that was on a screen someplace. The person who asked that wants to, did he ever drink? That's a good question. You know, I'm gonna look back at that receipt, see if there's any thing on it. I don't know the answer to that. That's a good question. He was a Congregationalist. I don't know that that means he didn't drink. That does mean that he was probably had abolitionist tendencies, especially the Ivanhoe Congregational Church here was very strong on abolition. But I don't know the answer. Did he ever drink? Oh, the plants on his land. Oh, thank you. So the question was, the typo actually had it spelled out. We're talking about the plants on Dr. Foster's land. And in the article, which I don't have in front of me, it actually had the numbers written out. It didn't have abbreviations or Roman numerals or any of that. So I was just surprised to think of 1.5 million plants, but who knows? Are there other questions about Mr. Cook? All right, well, I don't see anything coming up in the chat. I don't see anything in the Q&A portion of Zoom. So I'm going to take that to mean, oh, there's another question. Are there any family members still alive? Yes, there are no people that are direct descendants of the Cooks that have the Cook name. They just have the one adopted daughter, Ida. But as I mentioned earlier, David Strong, the Strong family, Ida's husband's family, are still alive. And they are the ones that did the presentation on Walter Ansel Strong. That is up on our YouTube channel. So I do invite you to see that. It's a very interesting family. So I mentioned that Ida and Albert had a number of children that died. The upbringing of the others that survived was hard. And the fact that one of them became the editor of the Chicago Daily News is quite amazing. So I invite you to watch that video. Okay. What was the population of Lake County around Cook's arrival? I'm going to come back to that one. How did Ida's 3 of 6 pass? Okay, I do have that information here. Hold on just a second. Let's see. I don't have the death of the first child. I don't have that written down here, although I do have it someplace. The daughter died of enterocolitis, which is inflammation of the small intestine or colon. And Edward Strong in 1895 died of appendicitis. What was the population of Lake County around Cook's arrival? I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know if anybody else, I see a lot of history people on here. I don't know if anybody else knows that off the top of their head. Oh, I see a message. Okay. Was the train the main transportation for Chicago and Libertyville, and how long was the trip? So the train that the Cooks were coming up on in 1881 had come up this way in 1872, but it was on the east side of the Des Plaines River. The train for, oh, I'm sorry, that's incorrect. Let me go back for a second. In 1872, a train came up on the east side of the river. In 1880, it came across the river and into downtown Libertyville. So the train that they would have been on would have been the one that came straight into Libertyville. How long was the trip? In the 1870s, 1880s, I don't know. It was approximately the same amount of time when you get into like the late 1890s, early 1900s, in the hour-ish range. Any idea why the siding and porch posts were changed? It was so pretty before the remodel. Basically, the thought is that it was the 1920s and they were changing it from a house into a civic building. And so to make it look like a civic building, they put on big classical columns and stuccoed the building. And now you have a library and not a house. But it actually had been a library. It served as the library from 1921 until 1968. Which is just about, I can't remember doing the math quickly in my head, it's just about the same amount of time that it was a residence, if not a little longer. And then it's been about that same amount of time now that it's been a house museum. So it's had 3 different purposes in its lifetime. Alrighty, the questions have stopped again. All right. Well, before I let you go, if you are interested in Mr. Cook and interested in the Cook home, we will be open again for the holidays. So the Cook home will be open and decorated on Saturday, December 4th and Saturday, December 11th from 11 a.m. till 3 p.m. So we invite you to come and see us on our Christmas open houses. And a reminder that we also do private tours, private group tours by appointment. Right now we're in decorating, so we're not quite ready at the moment. But if you can't make it during one of our open houses, you can always reach out to the Historical Society and schedule a tour. As long as we can find a docent who's available, we are happy to welcome you to the house. Oh, I see one thing in the Q&A. Hold on a second. Besides Water Tower Place, what other buildings did he build? Well, not Water Tower Place, but the Water Tower. The Delaware building that we saw the picture of. He also built an American Express building and the Tuttle Block, which I've got notes on where those are somewhere here, but I don't have it off the top of my head. I'm sure there were many others as well, but those are the ones that are generally called out in the profiles of his life. Did Cook always have a dog? Do we know the name of the one in the photo? I don't know the answer to either of those. But if you've ever seen the dog on the front porch of the Cook home, this is why we have a dog there, because we're kind of replicating this photo. I believe the dog today on the porch has a tag that says Jack. I don't know that that has any relevant, any historical or any basis in historical fact. We don't have the picture we have like this is not does not have any writing on the back. So is that the same water tower that made it through the fire? Yes, it is. Yeah, the water tower and the waterworks that are across the street. When did Cook become a construction man? Is that the question? Well, he was a mason, so he was a stone builder. And he and his father, Willard, were in that business in Connecticut with the Brainerd family. Again, we have Brainerd Avenue behind us. That's Ansel Cook's mother's maiden name. They were in business in Connecticut before they came out here. He got his first contract here in 1853 to build that courthouse that we saw kind of the line drawing of. Gotta clap. All right. Well, if you have any other questions, you know where to find us. Where is Mrs. Cook buried? Mr. Cook and Helen Cook are both in Graceland Cemetery. I believe Annie and Emily are there as well. I would have to double check that, but I'm pretty sure that's where they are. Okay, the longer I pause, someone's going to come up with another question. So, all right. Well, if you have any further questions, you can always reach out to me at the library. It's jbarry@cooklib.org, or just call the library and they will transfer you to my voicemail if I'm not here. You can reach out to the Historical Society at info at lmhistory.org. And I appreciate you coming this evening, and I hope we'll see you at the Cook home sometime this December. So thank you for coming, everybody, and have a great night.